Good.
We have such a good.
Good morning
Good morning.
to you.
And you.
And you over there in the back in the corner.
Yeah, you hey little guy hiding in the
Yeah.
corner.
Oh, I didn't even see you there. Oh,
Oh,
is that you?
what? What are you doing over there?
Wow, long time no see. Sorry I stepped on you. Wow, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Happy Monday.
Yes, it is Monday after a long holiday. How are you feeling about that? You feeling good? Like recharged?
You know, it's funny how that works, right? A lot of times you're like, yeah, we have this time off. We're going to relax and recharge.
Just
and then,
totally recharged. It'll be a vacation.
yeah, and then you're like, wait, it's Monday. It kind of feels almost like a like a car wreck in some ways.
Yeah.
You're like, it starts off good. You're like on the Autobahn and you're like, oh, dude, I could go as fast as I want right now. And just zoom, zoom. And then all of a sudden, you know, Sunday night comes around and you're like, oh. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you I've been in a number of car accidents, and you know, afterwards, like, you can be fine, but like you tense up during the wreck.
Yeah.
And then like for like a day and a half later, you're just sore. It's like all the adrenaline, all your muscles tightening up, and you're just like super sore. So like what they recommend after being in a car wreck is like go move around, stretch, don't just lay down, because you got to get that lactic acid.
Oh,
out.
yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So like this is like holiday lactic acid.
Yeah, don't just do nothing. You got to do something. Work
Work
through
it
the
out.
muscles.
Because it's tough.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, I've been in a couple of car wrecks myself. Nothing too serious, but a couple rear endings where you're in the car that's rear ending the other person, which if you're paying attention is unfortunate, because you see, it's one of the scarier ways I think of having a wreck, because you see it happening and then it happens and it's like, and then guess what? Every time you're in the car after that, like, even though it's not bad, it's like, all right, especially if you have people who are like, oh, you're right, you're falling a little closely. Can you not?
Yeah. Do you find yourself just jamming your feet into the floorboard? Like I'm like hitting the brakes for them, like my ghost brakes. Yeah.
You're like, you want that DMV special car?
Yes. Yeah, with the chicken brake in there.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Following people is like, all right, tell me what you're gaining here. If you can tell me logically what you're gaining, I will allow you to keep doing it.
I will allow you.
But there's all this cost to you doing it.
Yeah.
And just stop.
The upside is not worth it.
No, it's really not.
Yeah, it's the same. I've got a buddy that drives sports cars. He lives down in Houston, and he's always had these nice cars, but he does not speed. He's just like, not worth it. But like, he likes having the car, he likes having the power. Like, so there might be occasions where he'll go out and intentionally like get into a situation where he can speed a little bit. But
Right.
like day in, day out, he's always going the speed limit or less. And I'm just like, really? Like, you seem like you're such a like a car guy. You'd be like excited doing all this stuff. He's like, not worth it. And it took me forever, because I was always part of the family that went 5 to 10 miles over the speed limit all the time. Like, it was the way to be a good citizen, was to break the law, you know?
Yeah,
So,
I like that.
Yeah.
Be a good citizen.
Yeah.
Break the
Those
law.
are going with the flow of traffic.
Yeah,
I was just getting out of people's way.
That is my
Like,
favorite. My favorite excuse is like, everyone else is doing it.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, that's the thing though, and you literally hear about these techniques, and I've heard people I know reference them, right? And it's like, well, we've got the classic Ohio sandwich here. I made that one up. I'm sure there's some name for it, but
that sounds accurate. That sounds great. Like, yeah.
You get the Foss car up front to, oh, that's going to catch the cops' attention, right? Then you got a couple cars, and then you got you. You're sneakily in the middle, and then you got at least one covering your butt, because they're not going to pull over the second to last guy.
No, they won't get
right?
the second. They'll get the last one.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
But it's always fun how people develop all these strategies. I don't know. Like, once again, is it worth it?
Yeah. No, I'd like to talk a little bit about that risk-reward equation in a bit, but let's recap a little bit of Wednesday, for Ryder. Because,
like, what happened?
I know.
I wasn't here.
Honestly, it was great. We topped 10,000 viewers, and we had
congrats.
$1 million donated. And they're like, we want more like this. It was one of those contingent donations.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
it was like, hey, sorry, Ryder.
We can give you $10 million if you can get rid of that Ryder.
Yeah,
guy.
exactly.
Yeah, that was my parents got that offer when I was a kid too.
Oh, that's great. We talked a little bit. Danielle and I talked a little bit about Thanksgiving, and one of the things we talked about, our challenge, was encouraging people to be more intentional with their conversations. Danielle and I talked about how that was some of our favorite things about being in the RV and going and doing this travel. Is very unique in the case that it let us hang out with people during times that was not this standard larger group type of hangouts, which, so the holidays are great and there are a lot of good things about them, but if you're in a larger group, and we said probably more than 8 people, that's kind of when it's like, all right, this is a group, right? And some different dynamics evolve, right? It's a little harder for you to have a little bit one-on-one conversation or two-on-two conversation unless you're kind of intentional about it. It's very easy to go through a trip and then come back and be like, oh, this is kind of what woke me up to it. Somebody asked me after I went on a beach trip with my family, they're like, oh, well, how's so-and-so? And I was like, I don't really know. Like I saw them and I said, how are you? And they said, good, classic American answer. And it's like, but that's pretty much it. We talked a little bit about football or whatever, and we hung out. We had a good time.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I wasn't trying to poo-poo, like that's not okay to have that kind of relationship with people. But for us, it was like that was one of the things that doing the RV really helped us explore a little bit more was, hey, when we are intentional, when we are pushing past that first thing, it's like, oh, okay, like, yeah, I can tell that kind of that kind of stresses you out a little bit. Like that must be tough dealing with that for 20 years now that you've been doing that. Like what's that like, and kind of probing a little bit deeper and putting a little more interest past the, the throwaway, oh, how are you, right?
Yeah. I think this is pretty common. I like all that. I think it's great. It's also difficult, I would say, during the holidays as well. There's this weird thing where people are just trying to keep the balance. It's like, don't get into any topics that are actually real. Like,
right.
You might disrupt the illusion, that we're all a friendly, happy group getting along here. So, yeah, how do you kind of carve out those times? Did you end up getting a chance to do any of that?
Yeah, well, it was actually, on Wednesday, it was a great question by Danielle. She's like, okay, well, that sounds really good. So how do I do that? I'm like, oh, dang it.
Oops.
Wish I had thought about that one a little bit more.
Well, you get some duct tape and you just tie them down.
Right.
Them.
No, and I gave a couple of ideas on Wednesday, and it's something that I want to give some additional thought to and probably make some, more polished advice on in the future because I think it's very important. But it also doesn't have to be as hard as you would think, or you don't have to make it that hard. Oh, hey, Lincoln. What's up?
Lincoln.
Oh, Lincoln's joining us here today.
Hey,
He's just
bud.
coming to say hi after his walk. Yeah, why don't you grab this dog and then we'll close the door. Love you, buddy. See you later. Oh, now he doesn't want to go out the door. Hold on one sec. Oh, it's not playtime.
It's playtime.
Sorry,
Oh, I should have probably been carrying the show there, but that
oh,
was
that's
so
okay.
much fun to watch.
It's fun to watch a dog who thinks it's playtime when it's like, no, get out of the way time.
Just like hopping around, like yeah, yeah. Dogs don't have any of these problems with intentional
right?
conversations.
He's just like, hey, I'm intentional. Let's do it right now.
I'm here.
No, it really doesn't have to be that hard. It just is about pushing a little bit deeper. And I also mentioned on the show, it depends on who you're talking to about how difficult it is, right? There's a lot of people who are, for example, myself, like when I'm in a conversation, I'm usually one of, if not the one, driving the conversation. And I'm usually doing that by asking questions and trying to learn more and being curious. I mean, curious people, I think, probably have easier times, running conversations because they're just genuinely want to know more, right? And that was a big surprise to me when I started doing the entrepreneur thing, is when I would talk to people and be like, oh, what are you doing? Like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. And they would literally not ask a follow-up question. I'm like, what is wrong with you? Is like something broken?
Opened this amazing
like,
door.
Like you don't even want to know like the spectrum of like, do I sell like vibrating black dildos or Bibles or
Both
drugs?
at the same time.
Or am I just one of those guys who's like saying, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, so I can like not do anything?
Yeah, really. It is kind of funny because entrepreneur is such a broad general title that like it could. So I talked to a guy last night who he met a guy during Thanksgiving. That
good for him.
Yeah,
I'm glad to hear that.
He was. It's a super exciting story. So I met a guy who met a guy.
Hey, Mets squared.
Yes.
The Mets baseball team is doing really well these days.
Yeah,
I actually have no idea.
By the way,
They could be in last place for all I know. Are they even sports balling these days?
sports balling.
Oh my goodness. Anyways, you met a guy.
Sorry, I got lost in thinking about Met skis and all this stuff. Anyway, but he met a guy that was an entrepreneur. He does this thing. He lives out in like this very swanky gated community where like the minimum house is like millions of dollars, right? And
As you do.
yeah, like so when somebody like that's like, I'm an entrepreneur, you're like, so what do you actually do? And he kind of started drilling down on this guy. The guy does some sort of business that's based around lawn mowing. Where
Okay.
he just connects people who need their lawns mowed with services, and he takes a little bit off the top, and it's like you're only making like $5 per transaction. And he goes, yeah, but it's like 1,800 transactions a week. And then you go, wait, and you start doing the math on it, and you're just like, oh my goodness, this guy is just raking in so much money.
Yeah.
And you just start going like, so there's this weird thing about the entrepreneur thing where it's just like ways I would never think about things. I'm always interested when people are like, I found a way to scale making like $2 off of every transaction, and now I live in this swanky gated community,
Right.
and I drive around Ferraris.
And I don't really work. I have
don't-
people doing the stuff for me, and that's a big shift. And that's there's a lot of ways to run businesses, right?
Yeah.
But for me, and for a lot of people who run in the communities that I am, and the goal is to set up a business which is outside of yourself, which works for you. And I that's not because I intend to run away and step away and I don't want to do any work necessarily, but if you can set up something to work on its own, and then you can come and inject yourself and help guide it and shift it and do the work where you think it's most valuable, like that's a pretty ideal situation to be in. And also, hey, then when you go away for your week for your vacation and you have things running and clicking without you, that's a great feeling, one. And two, in an ideal world, it's making money while you're not there, right? Versus trading your time for money. So that's kind of like the ultimate dream for a lot of people with running a business, is getting something to that point. And it's really easy to forget about all of the various ways there are to do that. And is that a lot of money per transaction or a little bit of money per transaction in between? And so
the idea that you could introduce yourself as an entrepreneur and somebody has nothing to ask, that
especially when it's in a setting where it's like, and it's 2021, like legit, like I could be this Mark Zuckerberg kind of guy, right? And I could be access to billions of dollars and lots of fun times, and we could be on a yacht next weekend together.
Yeah.
Just ask me
Just
one
go a
more
little
question.
further. So yeah, this is like, so do you think that, because I've read a book and this guy real briefly talked about that because we live in an attention economy, then people can't even be bothered to pull their attention away from their phone to nod at somebody walking down the sidewalk next to them. And so it's interesting that you could be in a conversation with somebody, even if it's a family member during Thanksgiving, and they still cannot really dig into the conversation.
Yeah, what did you just say? Sorry, I wasn't really.
Yeah,
paying
exactly. Zoning out. Yeah. It's just like, is it a lack of attention span? Is it a lack of curiosity? Like, what's going on there?
That's a really good question. Let's talk about that here in a second. So just to recap, last week's challenge, Wednesday's challenge, was to be more intentional with your conversations. And so we've talked about that a little bit more. I think we're going to carry that on in a second. But for now, let's roll that intro. Helpful for life. Welcome back to What the Hell is Water. I'm Reed Garcia.
This is Ryder Richards.
And today is November 29th, 2021. And because the day has 29 in it, my wife Danielle's like, 29, that's our number. It's magical.
Why is this your number?
Yeah, you want to know why it's our number? The
I
universe is aligned, and 29 was born, and we were like, oh, this is so cute. It's our little number.
I'm even more confused
Yeah,
now.
exactly. Perfect. Goal achieved. No, actually, it goes back to, we started dating, and then we weren't really sure when, like, we officially started dating. And so we kind of picked a day or a date or something. We're like,
because y'all went on one date that lasted like 3 days?
It actually, like, 2.9 days. So that's where the 29 came from. No, and it was like, all right, hey, we think this is, I'm going to butcher the story because Danielle's not here, but I think that's when we had a significant date or our first date or something. We're like, all right, that's going to be our dating anniversary. And it was the 29th. And ever since then, 29 is a magical number. So we were talking about being intentional and having those deeper conversations and a little bit of a reprise, however you say that word, from our conversation last Wednesday. And Ryder was asking me how are you more intentional about those conversations, and then we kind of talked a little bit about how some people aren't curious enough to ask that deeper question, and then we were like, okay, well, is that because they're not really curious enough, or is it because they've been programmed to have this short-term attention span, or is it something else? In some cases, I think it's social anxiety, especially when you get into groups of larger people, and this is something that I personally have not struggled from that much, but I've seen a ton, like with my friends and stuff like that, is worrying about what other people are thinking and saying, and like, oh, if I say this now, will that be dumb or stupid or whatever? And so like you say something like, oh, hey, Ryder, blah, 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 what are you thinking? And it's like, and then Ryder gives some like, I'm doing all right. And I was like, okay, well, give me more. But meanwhile, Ryder's like going 100 miles a minute in his head, like evaluating all this stuff. So it's like not about me at all, right? But it's really just about you being in your head. So I think there's a lot of factors at play there.
Yeah, it's a good one to bring up, the social anxiety thing, and it brings up too one of the parts of a lot of Thanksgivings when we show up is there's always what in architecture school they would call a secondary distraction, right? So some sort of element that's in the space that allows you to not have social anxiety because you can stare at it, such as a television running all the time. So every house we go into during Thanksgiving, my sister, my dad, my in-laws, everyone's got a television running constantly. So that conversation doesn't have to be super awkward. Like we can do the, hey, how you doing? And then you can just turn and stare at the television.
Yeah, which is a great transition into one of the things we said we wanted to talk about today, which was, wow, I'm just blanking on how that was connected. But
yeah. I mean, we talked a little bit about, just during the holidays having like football on or something like that.
Right, that's what it was. Yes, yeah. So it reminds me of, the bar, right?
Yes.
And it's like I have to intentionally seat myself so I don't see the TV, unless we're there for that purpose and I like want to be seeing the TV. But honestly, that's kind of rare for me. Because I'm the kind of guy who, if I see it, it's going to distract me and I'm going to look at it. And also I know enough to like know what's going on and, talk about it if I wanted to, but yeah, a lot of times it's just over someone's shoulder and it's like, no, stop, go away.
Yeah. I found myself in that situation 2 or 3 times. Apparently, a little confession time. My entire family seems to love the show Yellowstone. Yeah, and
I'm more of a brownstone myself. A little more refined.
Classy.
Yeah.
yeah. Depends on the color of the stone, I guess. Yeah. But the Yellowstone thing was like, I'd never seen an episode of it. Everyone had told me it's great. Like everyone I bump into, like I'd go back to, my job and people at the office are talking about it. So I now have 7 episodes under my belt in about 2 days because it was just on constantly. We were watching reruns. Everyone loved it. They'd already seen it 3 times. Like, it was that kind of stuff. And of course, it's on and you can't help but if it's good television, which it is good television, then you kind of get compelled into it. But it's also taking away from all those actual bonding experiences.
Yeah.
So you're kind of like, there's like a very casual bonding that goes on about talking about what that Dutton family is doing on Yellowstone, and you never really talk about the other person's life.
Yeah. So I think that's a really great topic for us to talk about today, which is what are all the things that have gotten us to this point where we are as a society that frames how we interact when we're in groups together, and what of that is good, what of that is bad, and what of that is maybe okay but just needs to be shifted and changed a little bit. Because unless you're a guy who starts a company to think about life, these are the types of things you may not have thought about, right?
Yeah,
and you may not have recognized all of the little things that are happening. For example, when you're sitting there on Thanksgiving and you see, out of the 10 people who are there watching the football game, it's like, all right, I see 1.5 who are kind of interested in this, and then I see some people who are just bored and don't have anything better to do, and they don't really know what to do in this situation, or some are on their phone, some who are in the other room, and again, there's some who are just in their own head dealing with their own thing, wondering if people like their gravy, you know?
Yeah, yeah. The thing with the football game too is like, if you're in my family, then there's enough of us that are hard of hearing that the volume gets cranked up, so you can't do anything unless you're in another room.
Yeah, and then there's the fact that, okay, not only are we all consuming this thing, but the thing we're consuming is whatever we said, like 13 minutes of actual football,
Yeah,
and then 2 hours and 47 minutes of ads,
Yes.
and in between time. And it's like, okay, if you look at that objectively, like pretend you're an alien race. Like, again, to go to the Strange Planet
This is always such a good
comic.
idea.
It's
Yeah.
just such a great way to think of things. Pretend you're an alien race and you came down and you saw, through the ceiling and you observed this happening. And you're like, huh. All right, so you're telling me
They really like commercials.
yeah, they sit there for 3 hours after having gouged themselves,
Gouged.
gorged themselves. I don't know why I keep wanting to say gouge. Maybe it's because it's what it's doing. And it's like this again. It sounds super cynical, right? Like you could take anything to this level and be like, wow, what's the point? And I'm not trying to tear it apart completely, but it's like, hey, all right, well, maybe we had that football thing kind of uniting us for decades and decades now, and I'm not saying it should go away, but maybe you just have that on the smaller TV in the other room and not have it be in literally every single room. And especially like if the game sucks, like if the game is good and it's really close and it maybe is entertaining in of itself, that's good. But if it's just like your team and like you're angrily yelling at them because they suck all the time, again, I'm biased because I've never truly been in that world.
You're not a true sports baller.
Not a true
No.
sports baller. So yeah, it's easy to be like,
Yeah, I'm in the same kind of boat on all that stuff. I just see most of those entertainments with sports as being so transient, right? Like there's another season, there's another season, there's another game, there's another event, and it's just this sort of intentional roller coaster that people hop on, and they can love the roller coaster, they can love the entertainment value of it. It could be the same with Yellowstone. It's just a show. It doesn't really affect my life, possibly it could. We've talked about that a little before, the difference in entertainment and art and like which ones have the ability to sort of affect you. But these things just don't really do it for me. So there are other people though who would intentionally leave and go to a different house if you did not have
Right.
sports ball playing, on
and
the
in the
television.
bar, they're like, I'm not going there. There aren't
I'm not
TVs. And
yeah.
it's like, yeah, that was the point. And it's like, yeah, but I'm not going there. So, and I think both ends of the spectrum, need to compromise, right, a little and meet in the middle, as per most things, right? But I think the main point there is, well, what is the point, right? And it is to give a source of entertainment. It's to give a source of connection and also to give a conversation piece. That's a big thing, especially with, the random strangers or your one-offs. Like, when I'm in the store and I'm waiting in line, it's like, oh, do you see those Cowboys? And it's like, even I've, stooped to such levels when it's like, it's a softball conversation, right?
Yeah.
And it gets the conversation going. But I guess where I'm at and where I'm pushing is, hey, I think that's a great thing to get it started, but encourage you to push it deeper and push it past it. And so that's one area where I have enjoyed having sports be a part of my life, is because it's led to me doing some cool things and some cool experiences. And one of those is every year I go with the group of men in my family, uncles, grandpas, cousins, family friends, things like that. And we go to a different college football game every year. And so now we have this trip where it's, Wednesday or Thursday to Sunday, and we go to a different area of the country every year, and so you get to see that the school's culture. You get to get involved in the tailgating. You get to go check out the bar and the restaurant scene, get a feel for what the city's like, what the people are like, all those kind of things. And never would have done that probably if it wasn't this unique unifying thing that people could get around and say, hey, that not only just football, not only just for this one team, but we can now go do this anywhere in the U.S. And another interesting thing has been, well, now that we've gotten more people involved and this younger generation involved, who are like, hey, we like this and we recognize and enjoy the football aspect of it, but there's some cool things we can do about it. It's like, oh, let's go on a hike while we're out here. Or let's, okay, maybe we stay not right downtown, where we'll be a little further from the bars and restaurants, but we can, entertain ourselves and we can hang out at the house and have more of these natural conversations and things like that. But of course, there's some people who are like, no, we need more bars and restaurants. This is what it's about, that we need more college. We need to be more involved with the college itself. And so you have, again, whether it's Thanksgiving, whether it's whatever it is, everyone has their little idea of what the thing should look like. And they're all going to be slightly different. And of course, they all have their own values, but it leaves a little bit of that tension, right? And the same kind of applies to Thanksgiving, same kind of applies to any kind of family gathering.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of fascinating to think about that. A perfect Thanksgiving for one person is not my perfect Thanksgiving. So, if their perfect Thanksgiving is gouging themselves, and then watching and then gouging themselves on football or gorging. So just if it's all overconsumption while sitting on a couch and actually not talking to anybody, if that's their perfect Thanksgiving, then who am I to come over and keep on going like, hey, I want to have a deep conversation with you.
Right.
There's that kind of aspect too, which is that we all have our different goals, and there might be people whose entire goal is like, we keep talking the joke about, I have 3 or 4 days off, and yet I'm just exhausting myself like during these days. I never come back reset, I never come back like feeling like healthier after a family vacation. Then if that's kind of an issue, there's other people who have a solution for it. They're just like, I am just not engaging.
Right.
I will just eat the food and watch the sports, and I will fill up my tank. And when I go back on Monday, I feel great.
Yeah, and some of that comes from choosing where you're going to vacation or who you're going to vacation with. I even heard that. I feel like I heard that this week from someone who's like, man, this is different than what I normally do. And wow, there's so much less drama. And like, this is, which is another benefit of, regardless of whether or not you like the thing you're doing, trying something different, because when you do something, even if it's just like one thing, like, oh, this is how I do Thanksgiving, or this is how I go to a restaurant, or this is how I watch a football game, or this is how I play a video game or a board game. And then you think that's like how it is. And it's like, you go and do it some different way. And it's like, mind blowing. It's like, wait, you can play a game without everyone yelling at each other and crying and ending up. Well, maybe that's why I don't like games, because that's every time I've played it, that's how it's ended up. Or we can do this Thanksgiving where we're not all stressed out, we're not all on top of each other, and blah blah blah. It's like, oh, that's kind of nice. So yeah, I think it's important to recognize everyone is coming from a different thing and wants a different thing from the gathering, and that's true of any gathering, but Thanksgiving is especially that way because, one, you're generally dealing with a larger number of people, which means larger numbers of thoughts and opinions, larger number of baggage, frankly, and then also it's kind of amped up too, because it's oftentimes the very rare occasion for a lot of these people to be getting together, and especially when drama is involved between some people, right? It's just a nice, it's a really unique mix of things, I feel like, that comes around the holidays, right? It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's probably healthy to have that kind of this weird situation occur, and to sort of, I think it's also a strange tendency we have to pull ourselves out of anything that has the potential for stress or drama. Like, of course, I don't want stress or drama. I don't want any of those things. But the idea that you show up at these events and there's going to be some, but somehow maybe going through it and participating and minimizing it and other things, it might actually make you a stronger, better person, and yet we don't seem to want to set ourselves up into those kind of situations. I mean, why would you? It's like sticking your hand into a fire.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a great point, which is we're talking about, well, maybe Uncle Steve just wants to be left alone and recharge, and maybe that is for a good reason. But also there's value in doing some of the things that, we wouldn't naturally want to do, right? Yeah. And getting a little bit uncomfortable, because a lot of times when there's that discomfort, that means that's an area for possible growth, right? And that's been a cool thing to see actually in some of my family members, because we've had some people who, used to be that way, and like they're always on their own, they're always doing their own thing, and there's still some who are like that, but when they're there, they're engaging more than they used to, right? And it's cool. And it's like, all right, look, I get that you're the type of person who can't sit still and you need to go get out and do things, but I really appreciate you here hanging out and talking, and maybe I got to pry a little more to get in there, but when we are having those conversations now versus before, it's like, oh, well, where's so and so, so it's cool. And some of that's from people hitting them and being like, hey, get back in there, so there is this healthy amount of tension that's required.
Yeah, there's also that idea of, sometimes other people know what's best for you, which is, you do need family, you do need connection, you need these kind of things, and sometimes we just have to like drag you into the room and love on you, whether you want to be or not.
Right. And because frankly, especially depending on where you are in life and whether you're up or you're down, but especially if you're down, like there's a lot of times where I've heard the phrase where it's like, I know this is good for me, or I know I'm going to feel better afterwards, but just don't want to, or don't have that activation energy required. And so sometimes that's what it is. Like, hey, all right, peer pressure isn't always a bad thing. There's a healthy amount of good peer pressure to have that can encourage people to do the things that are ultimately good for them, right?
Yeah. Let's hope so. Let's hope peer pressure has a good side to it. Yeah, I think it does. And it's one of the things about some of this is I got into a nice long conversation with my mom. I got to see my dad's new house, which of course he's already thinking about remodeling because it's just this kind of thing. So, but getting to spend time with everybody is fantastic, and it's like it's so much different than phone conversations. And
Yeah.
just sometimes sitting around fussing with things, and we were doing puzzles, and we were putting together like playing with toys that were like puzzle tricks toys, and we're just having a good time just sitting around really doing nothing, but it leads into some crazy conversations. Like one of my sisters got this report done that like lists out all these chemicals and everything, and like what she's low and high in and all this kind of stuff, and it led to this conversation about there being like a genetic determinant for empathy. And
Interesting.
I was just like, whoa. Like, so this opened up an entire rabbit hole in my head. And I was just like, okay, that's great. Like, that would have never shown up unless we were sitting around just working on a puzzle, having random conversations.
Right. By the way, I need you to now draw some kind of art that shows like all of the infinite rabbit holes in your head, kind of like MC Escher style.
Yeah, they just keep going.
Yeah, like
upside down staircase.
yeah, but
rabbit
there's got to be
holes.
like multiple of them. I think that would be pretty cool and accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I and I want to get back to a couple of the things, but slightly adjacent. I want to bring back the Netflix aspect of it.
Yes.
And whether it's Netflix or Hulu or whatever. Let's just say the TV show, the intense consumption of TV and or movies as a social thing, right? Because one thing I've definitely observed over the last probably 10 years now is, especially if you haven't seen somebody in a while, one of the questions that often comes up after you get past the who are
Right,
you, it's like,
right.
oh, well, what have you been watching?
What have you been? Yeah,
Right?
That was so prominent all weekend.
Yeah, it
What's
comes
good?
up all the time. And then the other question is, so I'd like to talk about that. And the other question is, what is it valuable to sit and watch, together something? And
Yeah.
and is that true in small doses? Is that true in 7 in a weekend or 7 in a day?
Yeah, yeah.
Where is the happy medium? And the reason I want to ask that is because I think one of the things you were maybe alluding to is how sometimes you've got to push through the awkward and the boredom. And by having that awkward and the boredom, or having that other activity you're doing and just being around each other, that is what enables you to have those deeper conversations. It's you have that lack of a stimulant that is directing your brain where to go. Oh, we need to talk about this or pay attention to that. But no, it's just like idle boredom, right? People think boredom is a bad thing, but boredom actually can lead to a lot of really good things. And that's, I think, gets back to one of the faults of our overstimulated society. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm 100% on board with all of that. I do think that we tend to be quite, yeah, we're a little bit programmed now to do mass consumption together, and consumption of television I'm listening to an audiobook right now called Technopoly by Neil Postman, who also wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death. And so just the title of that tells you where
Right.
that's going. But yeah, one of the things about this is that we might actually, through our consumptive experiences, be kind of programming ourselves not to think, because storytelling is often, you can be engaged in the story, but your brain is passive. It's completely reactive to the situation. And so it becomes this kind of thing where it's a very comfortable space to be in.
Right.
And you can talk about Yellowstone after watching Yellowstone, but most of the time you just go, woo, that was a good one. On to the next, right? And we just have the autoplay feature running. And at some point, I do kind of doubt that we're gaining anything from it unless we're engaging in conversations about it afterwards. And no one really wants to do that. And so there's not critical conversations. There's nothing like that going on. So the idea that you would bore yourself a little bit, just sit in a room doing nothing, or have maybe a puzzle as a distraction. So you can work on a puzzle for 2 hours, but have conversation the entire time, and that could lead you into some territories around with the people around you, or even if you're doing it alone, your brain could enter into more interesting territory probably than Yellowstone is going to take you.
Yeah, and I think the problem comes with, you know, frankly, silence. I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with silence and they feel like it needs to be filled, which my message to you is silence is okay as well, and be comfortable with that. And legitimately, you may need to have conversations with some of the people around you. Be like, hey, just so you know, like, I don't think it's weird when it gets quiet. And I think that's a good thing. Comfortable silence and being comfortable with each other in the silence is a very good sign of a good relationship, in my opinion, right? Because that means you're not worried about everything else the other person's gonna say or think or do, and it's like, hey, I'm comfortable just sitting here in silence with you.
My constipation face.
Yes, that's always good. You know, it's a classic one. But yeah, so that's, you know, one of the things I was gonna suggest is a good, you know, oh well, Reed, well, how do I transition from, okay, we watch 7 shows in a day, which again, I'm not poo-pooing as a bad thing. You know, I think maybe not. Make sure you're not doing that all the time, right?
Yeah.
That's when it becomes a bad thing.
Actually, I think it actually bothered me some that I went to spend some time with my dad, because we do the split thing, right? Because my parents are divorced, and so they're never really caught in the same room together. So it's that makes everything a little more awkward. So I went to spend some time with my dad, and we just sat on his couch watching Yellowstone or some sort of Netflix action movie, and the volume is cranked all the way up, and then he's not thrilled when I have to leave. But so I was just like, is the point just to spend time sitting around each other? Like, and so I'm having to like question that. I'm having to think that either like it's actually hard for me, like I have to like focus or turn down the television or drag him out of the house in order to get an actual conversation going. And so it becomes more and more difficult over time. So I'm being pretty honest about all
Yeah,
this
for
right
sure.
now. It's just a difficult spot to be in, to see the television. It feels like the television is blocking or intruding on my relationship with my dad.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people can probably relate to that, because I know, you know, I've noticed that even with myself, like coming off of a weekend, a lot of times, if I hadn't had a good chunk of time where I was doing nothing, which for me means playing video games or watching Netflix or sitting on the couch, then I feel like, oh, I haven't relaxed. Even if that weekend was filled with a bunch of like fun things that I intentionally went and did. Oh, I spent time with these people. Oh, I went and played disc golf. Oh, I went outside on a walk. Oh, I went to the farmer's market. Like I did all of these things that I objectively, you know, sought out because they're good and they're fun. But yet then I still have that like weird feeling in the back of my head where it's like, oh, but I'm tired and I'm exhausted and I need some time to just veg out. And I really want to know how much of that is real, versus I'm just so programmed and used to, hey, this is what leisure is. Leisure is you sitting on a couch.
Yeah.
Leisure is you playing video games or watching a TV show. And I don't want to, you know, put everyone can be different, right? Maybe that's you reading a book, and maybe you read a book like I don't want to say too much, but all the time, right? And that's like your idea of relaxation is this.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I feel like this is now defined for a large majority of our population as going through a phone, possibly while consuming something else, which is another thing too, right?
Yeah.
I heard someone say this weekend, I was like, you know, I actually really like going to the movie because that's the only time I can get so and so to put their phone away while we're consuming something together. And it's like that's a really valuable thing, because it's like now, I mean, granted, like we'll be at home and doing it, and I'll be like, oh, did you know it just happened? And they'll spout it off like, you know, because they can do both, right? And I'm not saying you know various people can't do various levels of both, but it's different, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's something too about when you go back, even 10 or 20 years and look at the quality of the entertainment back then versus like how much CGI and graphics and storytelling is being done. and it's still not enough for us. Like, you still have to pull your phone out and do some cat side distraction during the middle of a multi-billion-dollar movie distraction, and like there's so
Which
many.
is the culmination of people's careers, right?
Yes,
There's like
yes.
400 people working on this, and a lot of their
Yeah.
careers built up to this thing.
Right, and you're just like, I'm gonna like do some Black Friday shopping while watching a blockbuster action movie, while and there is something about it isn't like you hear all these blips about our attention span being that of a goldfish now, or less than a goldfish, but other research has proven that our attention span hasn't actually changed. It's just how we're using it. So it isn't that there's a time difference, it's just that we use it differently. Like, we're always trying to multitask now, we're always trying to multi-stimulate. And so you start getting into things like chemicals, you start getting into norepinephrine, you start getting into things like dopamine. And those are chemicals that you can actually, like with dopamine, you can create an addictive craving around. And so there becomes this way that we are now programming ourselves chemically, and that's maybe even more different than our attention span itself.
Right.
And so when I bump into somebody that has to have the phone going while the entertainment is going, while all these other things, which sometimes is me, by the way, like I'm not immune to any of this, but then I start going like, I got to reset. How do I reset? And so those become conversations I have for myself. But yeah, I don't know when we're going to circle back to Thanksgiving, and we're going to circle back to this one limited time span that you get to bump into all these people and hang out with them. You're not going to reprogram them. So how can you make the most of that?
Yeah. So how can you make the most? So the first thing is recognizing that it is okay and maybe even good to have some sort of, I'll call it an idle distraction.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll emphasize idle distraction, right? I think if you're doing something that is taking your full, commitment and watching, and like for some people that's intently watching a football game and commenting on every play and all that kind of stuff. For some people, maybe that's watching a Netflix show. But I also mentioned there are types of shows you can put on where it's like, oh, this is just a background show, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't need to be sitting here watching the whole thing. It's not like, oh, what was that? Did I miss that? Like all those types of things, right? Sitcoms fall in a great category for that. It's like, hey, it's something you have on the background, especially if it's something that people have seen a lot, like for example, Friends or whatever. It's like, oh, people can, Danielle, she'll hear one line and she can picture the entire thing already, right? So I think having an idle task that's, again, kind of a background, kind of like, it's like almost like white noise, right?
Yeah.
But the thing I've been leaning on more and more to do that myself has been music.
Mm-hmm.
And ideally, like intentionally chosen music, not just turn on the radio, but hey, let me put on this song that I think, one, this is going to be a good vibe, or I think so-and-so is going to like this, or especially if it's like, oh, okay, this person I can't normally get to engage, but I know they really like this music. So I'm going to put this music on to encourage them to kind of hang around. And then that's when you also get like, and this is one of my favorite things, which happened this past week, is like, oh, you get some people kind of humming or singing around the table, and that just puts everyone in this better mood. And especially if you're doing something where people are kind of bored, or maybe you're in a game and people are like, they're kind of these competitive things or whatever, where there's these moments of silence. Well, instead of just sitting there in silence, which again is perfectly fine, I would encourage some of you, if this really scares you to be in silence, and you should try it sometime. It's not as bad as you think. And you might
be worse.
It might be worse. Dun dun dun. No silence. Make it stop. But yeah, sometimes you need a little bit of silence. But I find that music is very good. And then another one of my favorite things is games. Playing some board games. And if you're with a general group, I would encourage you to stay on the lighter side. Don't want to go too deep, because then you get into things like, well, people don't want to feel stupid. People don't want to not understand what's going on. And frankly, some people just don't want to think that hard right now. And those are all fine things. But having that thing for something to do, for people to do as they're kind of chatting and stuff like that, it allows for more of that, quote unquote boredom, if you will, where it's like, all right, well, but at least you've removed that intensity of that stimulation, so it allows for you to have that better connection. And also, by the way, some of it may be like legitimately just telling the person that's with you, like, hey, look, I can tell you're busy right now, but I'd really would like to chat with you without your phone, so let me know when you get a few minutes so we can catch up, so something like that, where you don't say it in a really judgmental, harsh time, like, hey, but just be like, hey, look, I'd really like to chat, away from devices for a little bit. Something I'm trying to do a little bit more of. So, after you're done there, why don't you come over and we'll have a drink or play a game or whatnot.
Man, that's a really nice way to do it. I also like the idea of just like, hey, I'm trying this thing out.
Yeah.
Can you help me with this? And see how that goes.
It's very much, again, like anytime it comes to something like this, because a lot of people be like, but Reed, I don't like conflict, I don't want to do that type of thing. Well, it's all about making it you and me versus the problem, and also make it about you. It's much easier to get someone to do something with you, because you're saying, hey, this benefits me, and I want you to do this with me because I know it will make both of us better, versus someone doing it on their own and saying like, oh, you're always the one with your phone out at the table, blah blah blah. Like, you're putting the people on the defensive. Like, are there times when you've noticed that like other people have done stuff with you and it's kind of helped you, I don't know, do it better and become a better person?
Oh, no, probably not. I do everything.
Yep.
No.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been with Ellis
Perfect.
Water.
Yeah.
I'm
No.
perfect as I am.
Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of the group thing, and part of that started for me when I was working out kind of casually and started going to a group.
How do you work out?
Like I just
Casually.
like hang by the bar,
Yeah.
put out the vibe. You know?
Yeah, I lifted that a couple times.
I know. I just like have a windbreaker on, but it's not zipped all the
Oh,
way
yeah,
up. You know
yeah.
how it is. Yeah. But yeah, I was working out, and I knew these people that were working out, and they ran their own gym, so I kind of was just like, hey, I think I might need some motivation, some personal training or something. They were like, come to group training, and I was like, oh no, like I don't want to work out around other people, and which is crazy because I did a lot of sports when I was young. It was all group sports, and then it was just kind of like, but ended up doing it, and man, if it doesn't help, it's a lot of fun. And I found that when I started working remote, I was alone all the time. So it was my only social interaction of the day was to go to this group event and work out. And then later, now I'm in like group therapy. So the therapy that I go to is a group of people. And there are just so many different things you learn. And I think it happens quicker when you're in a group. And the social interactions are this kind of beautiful thing. I don't know. Now I'm a big fan of doing anything with a group. So with the fitness stuff, it keeps you coming because of the social interaction. With the group therapy, you get new insights and you get to actually develop new friends through these things. Where if I was just doing it all by myself, I'd still just be a lonely man on top of my mountain.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Oh, I think there's a really important thing that this group dynamic it brings up, which is, guess what? Especially if you've got a handful of people, you get to hear what all of those other people are doing wrong, and you're probably doing some of those things wrong yourself, right? And so that allows you to say, well, Susie, you didn't go low enough on that squat. And it's like, oh, I should probably maybe pay a little closer attention. I've been cheating on those for a minute.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But without it directly, hurting me or making me get on the defensive, it allows you to better see the flaws in yourself by seeing them in other people. And that's also, I say flaws, but that's also positive things and also good things, right? It's like, oh, wow, they're really killing it. Oh, they're here on morning every time. Wow, they are here on time
Yeah,
every
there we
time.
go.
And it's
Yeah.
like, I'm here 15 minutes later every time. Maybe I should, start to try and be more like the group. So then I start to get there a little, earlier or whatnot. Man, I could tell they're really giving it their all. And I know that I can give more than I am right now. And so all of these little things, like whether or not you're conscious of it, by the way, you're probably not conscious of most of it, but these are all psychological things that are going on that encourage you to do the thing, to do it better, and to be a better version of yourself. Because the reality is, just like a horse in a race or something like that, it's going to go faster if it's getting a little bit of encouragement. Maybe that's from a coach or someone who's riding it and saying, all right, let's go, let's go, let's go. But some of that's from seeing the other horses that are in the race too. And it's like, this guy's getting close. I better speed up, right? So all of these things. And guess what? Let's say that race is 5 minutes and he could do it by himself or he could do it alone. It's the same amount of time, but just by doing it with the coach and doing it with the group, that 5 minutes becomes much more effective and much more useful. And oh, by the way, that's perfect for us Americans. We're always trying to do things better. We always got a lack of time. So it's like, if you have the chance and the time, then why not do that with a group, right?
Yeah, you sort of maximize the time you do have in an interesting way. Like if our workout is like an hour block, and we really only end up working out, say, 35 minutes. But when you're working out alone, sometimes you'll just sort of fudge something. Sometimes
Right.
you get toward the end and you're just not, you don't have the energy, or like, oh, I hate doing lower back, or I hate doing abs. And so you just bypass it. But when you're with a group and you're doing it and you got the music on and everyone's doing it and they're all holding a crunch for like 2 minutes or something, then all of a sudden it's like, I don't know, you're part of the group dynamic. You don't want to let anyone down. All of a sudden, you're getting a better workout, a more intense workout with your friends. You all sort of end up bonding. You all like high five each other or something afterwards. You know, a couple guys slap me on the butt.
Yes.
It's really nice. You know?
Which is just the right amount of homosexual things that can happen in Texas before it crosses the line.
You only get 2 butt slaps.
Wait, hold on.
Wait, what?
Was that a 3/4 of a second linger? I don't know. I don't
Got
know.
a little grippy there, John. Yeah.
John's always grippy, isn't he? He's
It's not a
70. He didn't
slap
have
and a
time to
squeeze.
explore in his youth, you know?
Poor
You can't
guy.
blame him.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's an old man.
He's
It's
like, oh, wow,
fine.
that actually, wow, you must have been working out. Wait, he has been working out.
I guess
It
what?
all full circle there, right? But yeah, I think there's a lot there that comes from doing the thing as a group. And another thing, whether it's group related or just learning in general, I found that something that I get a lot of value out of and something I've paid more and more attention to, have noticed, is how much learning happens in the in-between. And that in-between is much more likely to happen, I think, as you move to a group setting versus just by yourself. Because I couldn't tell you, I'm involved in some online communities, one that's largely around entrepreneurs. And it's like, all right, these people are all trying to create some type of business that has an online aspect to it, just like mine. So let's learn, again, from each other, learn from the struggles people are going through, but then also in the in-between, and be like, we could be talking about, oh, hey, let's talk about our mental wellness, make sure we're staying on top of things, because guess what? If you're a solo entrepreneur, your head and your heart, that's like the key to everything. And it's like, if you don't prioritize that, then how do you expect to like have a solid business if you're not, putting yourself solid foot first? So we're talking about that. We're having this whole conversation, but then there's like one little side conversation, one sentence, someone will be like, oh yeah, well, I was doing this with this tool, and then I did this other thing with that tool and did this thing. And I'm like, in one sentence, you just saved me 2 months of work and research, because it's like, you figured out how to do this thing, and now I know how to do that, right? And so same with the exercising thing. It's like, oh, yeah, I really struggled with my dip form, or, it's embarrassing for me. I don't like doing push-ups because I can't do more than 2. Well, if you're at a gym with someone who does it all the time, like our beefhead friend Danny, he'll be like, look, man, I'm going to help you out here. Like, if you do these push-ups from your knees instead, you're going to be able to do them now. And then you can get those 10, 20 in. And then later in the future, maybe you do half and half and you can transition, versus you're trying a little bit and you fail completely, so you don't want to do it at all. So those are some of the things you get from like, hey, and then also that's where people are at. That's another thing that you get with that group dynamic. You're naturally going to get some people who are ahead of you in some things, some people who are behind of you in other things. And guess what? You may even be able to help other people too, which is another aspect that kind of brings it along. And hey, it's easier for me to do this hard thing that I don't really like doing, or even if I do like doing, it's just frictionful. It's difficult. It's easier for me to do that because I'm working side by side with this person. And, I know that this person's a single mom and they need this right now. And this is huge for them. So I'm going to become a better person and help drive them for them. Right.
Yeah, like there's so many different motivations that can happen when you're in those groups, and those sort of like you're talking about those little moments in between and how important all that is. And what's crazy about it is you end up having friends and life experiences you wouldn't normally have if you don't sort of do something that's in this kind of group dynamic. And I think increasingly this all comes back a little bit. We could even make a loop back to this idea of consuming media and doing that solo versus doing something in a group. But I think what's really important there is that the thing about doing these group therapy or group workouts or being in these entrepreneurial groups or whatever it is that you're there for a sort of a fixed intentional reason. And then the conversations can sort of revolve around that. I think what tends to happen with media is it's like a passive thing that you just sit back and watch. And now if you're going to have a conversation about it later, because of course on the way home I decided I was going to expound on what I thought about Yellowstone to my wife, right? And we both had our opinions about it, and it was kind of fun. But that ended up actually leading to a conversation. And in that case, I'm like, yeah, that's cool. But yeah, I'm kind of a big fan of the group dynamic for a lot of reasons now that previously I shunned, and I'm interested in the tendency I have to shun things. I'm interested.
Shun the non-believers. Shun.
Yeah, I'm kind of think that's weird. Like, why would I not want to get into situations with other people or have fun with other people? And it's like, what 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 aspect of my life has programmed me to want me to be alone all the time? So yes, I can learn alone, I can read alone, I can be alone, but man, I learn faster, I learn quicker, and I can do it with friends. If you're an efficiency guy, that's the way to
Yeah.
go.
Or it's like, hey, I'm building a shop and I can do this thing myself. Damn
Yes.
you.
Yes,
I can do
I
this.
can.
I can build this ceiling, lift it up, and do this. Meanwhile, my wife's behind me like, hey, you want a hand with that?
Nope, I got it. Yeah,
I don't know anyone who has that issue, though. Do you?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I've heard of a guy.
Yeah, me too. We've all heard of at least one guy.
Yeah.
But hey, it wasn't the reason why we started bringing up all this group stuff, but I feel like we can't not mention that later this week, Helpful for Life is launching a way for you to take back the holidays, and that is going to be through a form of group education. It's called a cohort, which is a fancy way of saying a group of people going through something at the same time. Like a boot camp is one example where it's like, oh, you've got this 6 weeks, we're going to do this together. Like, well, this is, a 3-week cohort that is taking back the holidays. So we'll give more information about this later this week. But it's going to be about cooking. It's definitely going to be about cooking. We're going to be leveraging Kickstart Your Kitchen, our online course. So you can, that course enables you to cook and revolutionize the way you cook in as little as a weekend. And it's valuable whether or not you've been an experienced cook for years and years and years, or you burn easy mac and you can't even make a sandwich like my friend Ryder over here.
I actually don't eat
Just-
when it's up to me to cook.
Yeah.
Like, just,
So we're going to be learning about that each week. We'll have 3 weeks where we'll have a live session each week where you can join in and you can ask your questions, and we'll provide some extra knowledge for you guys there. And if you can't join live, that's fine too, because it will all be recorded and you can submit your questions before and after. And then you will also be left with Kickstart Your Kitchen, the course, because guess what? In these 3 weeks, we're gonna highlight like, hey, as you're focusing on the holidays, let's work on this thing, and this thing. And we're going to say, look, there's this whole world of cooking and hosting and cleaning and organizing, all this kind of stuff that's out there, and we have information on all of it, but we are going to be the coach for you. We're going to guide you through each one of those things and say, hey, right now, here's what's important. Focus on this, prioritize this, and oh, by the way, grab a friend, and hopefully you'll meet some random online friend, right? And maybe you can commiserate with some people over their relatives, that are watching, I don't know, something worse than Yellowstone, 7 episodes in a row, like Bachelor. Oh my gosh, don't even get me
reality
started.
television.
No, I'll take silence over that.
Yeah, I would please. Yeah,
Anything but that.
I think I honestly would.
Yeah.
I would just go
I could
outside and huddle
do
in the
maybe
corner.
one episode, but 7 in a row of that, I wouldn't. I wouldn't stand for that. I would stand up for
I
that
would
and
stand
walk
and
out
walk,
the room.
yeah.
And I wanted to also, so yes, you'll be hearing some more about that later this week. But I also wanted to remind people of one of the challenges we did a couple weeks ago, which was turn off that autoplay. And it seems like a really small thing, and you can be like, I'm better than that. Yes, I am. But no, it's not about being better or worse. It's like, just give yourself the ability to choose and take out that caveman aspect of your brain where it's like, oh, what am I going to do now? No, it just starts auto-playing. It takes away that choice. And it may seem really, really small to you, but having to actually pick up the remote and press that button to continue means you have to make that choice, which makes it harder for you to do and gives you that little bit of hesitation, that little bit of time for you to change your mind or decide, oh, should I do something else? Because that's part of the thing you were talking about with your dad when you were opening up about how you feel like maybe you didn't connect as well because y'all were using this almost as a crutch maybe. Content and video games, they're very good at taking away time. Social media, very good. Like you look up and you're like, wow, it's been an hour, it's been 2 hours, which, is good sometimes. But other times it's bad. And that's the thing I started to allude to when I notice these weekends where I don't feel like I'm doing it right. If I haven't done this relaxing, this video game or this Netflix, well, I've found myself also a lot over the last few weeks where there are days where I did nothing but that and I didn't feel good. You know, I'm like,
Yeah.
man,
Wait, you did all this relaxing and you don't feel good, right?
exactly.
Yeah. Oh.
And so it's like, man, maybe it's because I recognize that there's somewhere in the middle where I do a little bit of that, but then I go outside, or then I do all these other things that I've decided that are things that make my life rich.
Yeah.
So yeah, turn off that autoplay, and we're actually gonna make that another challenge for today because I think it's that important. And honestly, if there's one small change that I think could affect billions of lives, which as silly as that sounds, as much an overstatement that sounds, I truly think it is them disabling that autoplay.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that's what they're going for, is to just keep us on screen all the time. And Reed was talking about turning it off because then you have to make a choice. That in itself is something that's increasingly being taken away from us just through design.
Yes, and the other thing I wanted to point out that came up this past week too was on the iPhone. There's this use of your alarm, and you can set a bedtime. And another nice thing is anytime you find yourself like, hey, I don't want to have that confrontation. I don't want to do that thing. Well, take it outside of yourself, and you add the third party, which is probably a computer or some robot, and have that computer be the bad guy, right? And so let's say Ryder works for me, and instead of me going, Ryder, you're not doing this thing, right? You have not done ABC. Instead of me saying that, we have a status report that's automatically compiled every week and like, all right, Ryder, how'd you do? And it shows like failed 3 out of 5, failed 0 out of 100. All of the failures that he had, we have right in front of him.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, real long list. Then it's like, it's not me saying, Ryder, like, you're an idiot. Why are you doing things? Which gets him on the defensive. It's Ryder looking and saying, wow, looking at that scorecard,
yeah,
we probably need to work on something.
Yeah, pulling that problem outside of yourself and all those kind of, there's something interesting too when you're talking about the bedtime setting or whatever for your phone where it won't receive notifications after a certain point. I think there is a law that was passed in France recently where you can't, it's illegal to email work related stuff outside of work hours.
I like it.
Or it's not illegal, but it's a
highly frowned upon or whatever.
Yeah, there is a legal precedent where you can't force people to email you outside of work hours. So what's funny about that is email was supposed to save us all this time and energy, but then of course people took it home to work, and now there's a law saying you don't have to email work from home. And I'm interested to see if that spreads, but there's actually legal precedent now for you people in certain countries not taking their work home with them. So that's the other problem with these sort of devices is you can use them as a buffer for somebody, but also you can turn them to bedtime mode so you don't have to pay attention. You can find ways to make sure, and you can let the device be the bad guy.
Right.
The reason you couldn't contact me is because I have my phone set up where you can't contact me.
And
it's
guess
not 'cause
what?
I don't like you. I'm doing this.
And that's a conversation now for that person.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, hey, I saw this came in, just so you know, I don't work between these hours. And it's like, okay, then they're either going to push through and try and force the issue, or you can be like, just draw the line in the sand and set the boundary. Like, no, it's not, I'm not going to do that,
don't
right?
do it.
But the other thing the bedtime thing does is every night, an hour before I'm supposed to be going to bed, it plays that lullaby or whatever. It's very I can't do it. Do you know it off the top of your head?
No, I don't. I have mine silenced.
Yeah, but it's actually good to have Audible if you're in a group, because then that becomes the bad guy, right? It's like, oh, I've got to go because it plays this tune that is very much everyone knows is like that's a bedtime thing.
Yeah.
So I'll be in this group and it'll be like, I got to go to sleep. And we all kind of like look around at each other. I don't say anything, but it's like, okay, maybe we should start finishing this up so I can get to sleep, right? So making the bad guy the third person, again, me and you versus the problem instead of me versus you. So we talked a lot about a whole bunch of things today, and I'm doubling down on my challenge because I think it's a really important one. Go change your Netflix autoplay setting. And if you have a legitimate, logical reason as to why you're not going to do that, please comment. Tell me why, because I'm all ears. I just can't think of a good reason unless like you have some sort of physical disability where maybe that helps you. Like other than that, I can't think of a good reason why you shouldn't want to. Give yourself that choice. Give yourself that agency to make yourself decide, all right, this is what I'm going to do. And maybe if autoplay isn't for you for whatever good reason, which you're going to share with me so I can share with others, then maybe you set a timer, right? And say, okay, I'm going to allow myself to watch 2 hours of Netflix a day. And then I'll decide then, do I want more or do I want not? But the point is, giving yourself a decision point makes all of the difference in the world. Right now, all of these companies have us programmed to where we don't have that decision point. They want you to be on it for as long as possible, even though that is not what is best for the world. It's not what is best for you. So take some of that back to yourself. Turn off your autoplay, and I'll share the link to the episode where we did that. I think I even showed a screenshot, but of course you can Google it and find out. So yeah, that's the challenge. Any other last thoughts for today?
No, it was a fun kind of meandering episode, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, amen. And look out for Ryder's rabbit hole brain art. It's now been officially commissioned. We'll see.
Yeah, okay.
Let's see. Was this your witch's brew?
Yeah, this was me with my marker,
Nice.
making a really like childish drawing
I
of
like
my
it.
brain.
I
with
like
holes
it.
in it.
Rabbit, bunny.
Rabbit hole.
With that, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.